Welcome to Building While Flying, a Sasha Group podcast where we interview business leaders about how they tackle challenges, stay resilient, and navigate ever-changing skies. Welcome to Building While Flying. My guest today is Nicholas Stone, founder and CEO of Bluestone Lane, the fastest growing premium cafe brand in the United States. Almost a decade ago, Bluestone Lane reset the coffee scene, introducing New York to the flat white, along with its Australian-inspired cafe experience. Now, with over 65 locations across 8 markets, Bluestone is committed to providing great cafe experiences focused on human connection. Prior to founding Bluestone, Nick's previous lives include 11 years in corporate finance, fun for everyone, and advisory. And prior to that, 6 seasons as a professional Aussie rules football player. What a pedigree. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thanks, Katie. No, great to be here. Definitely an outsider to the hospitality industry. And geez, I picked a good period to dive in. I'm sure we'll go through COVID and all the fun we're dealing with now, but great to be here and obviously in a beautiful office and a beautiful day in New York City.
Yeah, absolutely. Home to Bluestone Lane, the OG. You're based here.
Exactly right. First store opened in 2013 in Midtown Manhattan in a subterranean basement of a Class B office tower. We couldn't afford a Class A like we are here right now. Yeah, it's humble beginnings, and I probably never thought that this would ever grow into something where I actually left my banking job. But here we are, and we're nearly at 10 years, which is
it's bonkers.
Extraordinary.
Yeah, it's awesome. Congrats.
Thank you.
And so much has changed during that time, including coffee culture itself, which I think you guys had a lot to do with. When we first chatted, you mentioned that you started Bluestone out of necessity, and you talk about yourself as an outsider. Do you want to talk a little bit about those origins just to ground us?
Yeah, sure. I'm originally from Melbourne, Australia, and Melbourne is the coffee capital, the hospitality capital of Australia. And we, in Melburnians, really transitioned from drinking tea, heavy British,
inspired by my peeps.
Yeah, the POM influence. And when we had mass migration from Italians and Greeks and Maltese in pre and post World War II, so in the 40s. And then there was this slow transition into espresso coffee. So we've never had a drip coffee culture. So you can't get a drip hot brew that's synonymous with US culture. So for us, we've been drinking espresso coffee for a long period of time. And there was just this evolution in Australia which incorporated leveraging more sophisticated yet accessible breakfast and lunch options. And these cafes just became much more sort of European-centric, but had the access to the amazing produce that's found in Australia. And that has just continued to innovate. And coffee is just a way of life. And the way that we think about coffee, certainly when I moved to the US in 2010, was coffee was about fulfilling a need for a product. It was fulfilling a need for caffeine.
Yeah.
And
that keep going.
Just keep going. Just get another big cup of joe. And for me, coffee was a ritual, such a critical part of my day where I'd walk in and they'd know me and they'd know my order and they just made me feel part of the community. And I would love to go with other people and use coffee as a social medium to catch up and connect. So when I moved here, I went to business school before I started working back at my old bank. I just couldn't believe when I'd ask people about, where'd they go for their local place? And they didn't have really locals.
Probably couldn't even name it kind of thing.
Yeah, it was. It was just like, we just go wherever's convenient. We just go to that place for a coffee. I'm like, no. Having a coffee is different in my eyes. It's really about this experience and this ritual. And so that really stoked the coals and I started thinking about it. And I had no experience in hospitality, so my views were pretty limited. And I had a very, very myopic view on Starbucks because in Australia, Starbucks failed.
Yeah.
And there's no Dunkin', there's no Costa Coffee, there's no Pete's, there's no Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf. It is the land of the independents. And that's why I was so struck by the success of Starbucks by serving a product that I personally wouldn't consume. They had nailed so many things with their value proposition. I thought there must be more people like me that are looking for better quality coffee, better quality food, more tasteful and thoughtful atmosphere and aesthetic. And ultimately, what do I really want? I just want that recognition piece where I walk in, they say, hey, Stoney, hey, Nick, whatever you want to call me, I don't mind.
They know your order.
I feel like a local. Just a lot of people resonate with, I could see it with Mani and Petty places. I could see it with Wash and Fold. That was a whole new phenomenon because I moved to West Village and there was 10 different places where you could get your washing done and everyone had their local and they were quite strong about it, like patriotic about it. I go to Jimmy's place and he never messes up my linen or my shirts. But then they didn't have that same affinity with coffee. And I just thought, this is wild. Like, this is the opposite of Australia. And hence Bluestone Lane a few years later.
To your point about coffee as a way of life, the European influence of coffee itself, but also that health and kind of fresh food produce side of Australia, that kind of, it's got that laid back vibe, the kind of like Bondi sensibilities. Yep. I just got back from a week in Rome, actually. And one of the things that we kept talking about, my partner and I, is you go out for a coffee there, and that's the whole stand up at the counter, quick espresso, chat for 5 minutes and you're out. Like such a different format. And it's so interesting how different cultures like.
And both kind of work. And that's how we designed the business. We had coffee shops to begin with. We had one in Midtown Manhattan, one next to the Stock Exchange in the financial district. They had very limited seating. It really was stand up, quick 10-minute break because I've got to get back to the desk.
It works well for finance.
Yeah, it works really well. And then in the third location was just over around a year after that we opened the first one in Midtown Manhattan. We opened that in West Village, and that was the first time it was a cafe, which was the broader offering, which was in a residential area. And that was honestly the store that activated the brand and really gave us that North Star of what the power of hospitality and what we could be. And I do think that was the category shifter for everybody. And we didn't know it was going to be as successful as it was. Every Saturday or Sunday, you're queuing over an hour to get in. And that was horrible to me. I'm like, we have to get people through. But one of the great things about being Australian and the values is this humility and how it's so respected and treating everyone the same, and this notion of mateship and equality. And I would have some of the biggest well-known celebrities coming down to Bluestone, and they would just be queuing like regular Joe Blow, Nick Stone. And I love that. I love that it was democratized and we didn't take reservations and there was no special treatment. Everyone was treated well, and it only took a couple of weeks, and then you have Taylor Swift walk in, or you have James Franco or Leonardo DiCaprio or Cameron Diaz.
And then everything goes to the races. Love it.
And then it's just on. And ultimately, they just wanted to go for a great coffee and some fresh food as well. And, it's seen tremendous growth in the category since then.
And that's how you deal with those huge lines, is you open another store, right?
Yeah.
So we've talked about the beginnings, and I'd love it if you could talk a little bit more about what I think does sit at the heart of the brand that you've talked about, this idea of feeling like a local and connection in the context of what we then went through, which is 2 years of pandemic, complete shutdown. Like, that was a crazy pivot that you must have had to take. How did that impact the business, and where did you draw from to carry you through those couple of years of pain?
One is a terrific question, because ultimately that is where Bluestone is going to win, and that is where we're sustainable, where we make people feel like they are part of the community, like a local, not a homogenous customer. It seems so transactional. It seems like there's no feeling. I didn't create Bluestone because I had this need to be a barista, or I had this crazy interest in coffee, or this obsession. It was because I missed the human connection. I missed walking in and just that recognition piece. And ultimately, there was a big need for it prior to COVID, because we witnessed that, some of these big cities like New York is the best city in the world, could also be one of the most lonely places in the world.
Yeah.
Everyone's on the grind. You come here to make it. You don't float in New York City. No one floats unless you've got very, very fortunate.
Heaps of personal income.
Yeah, family that are happy to float your lifestyle, but that is very few and far between. And you've got to come here, and ultimately it's just a melting pot of so many different cultures and nationalities. And you talk to people in New York, they might be American, but they're not from New York. They've moved here to chase a dream or what have you. So you already had this sort of loneliness, and then we already had issues with this obsession with digital connectivity, almost as a substitute for human connection. That was happening pre-COVID.
Yep.
And then you had COVID, which was the most challenging issue the hospitality industry has ever faced.
Yep.
Certainly in the last 100 years. I look back when we were at war, World War II, and people used to commiserate and celebrate every day that they were on Earth at a pub. They would actually still go out and socialise and celebrate that they're here, and maybe their brother or their father or the whatever are on the front line, and they're here keeping the
home spirit alive. Yes, exactly.
But now suddenly you had government intervention that pulled people apart. And for us, we see now that we've got such a tremendous issue with mental health, like people feeling isolated, people feeling lonely, people feeling like they have no friends. The stats coming out of the US, the UK, Australia about mental health deterioration in young people, in millennials, and then Gen Z, it's just absolutely frightening. And the digital veil that social media provides, and this positive bias, there's so many externalities. I'm reasonably well read in this space, and I'm really personally interested, but the number one consistent piece of advice that professionals provide to someone that's feeling depressed or down or flat is to go out and speak to someone, go and see someone.
Human contact of any kind, yeah.
And what is the best way to do that? There's almost no better way than sitting down and having a coffee. It's an affordable luxury experience. It's not alcohol. It's open to everyone. You don't have to have coffee. You can have hot chocolate, have whatever you want. We want to be known as the brand that facilitates that. And sure, if you want to come in and get a coffee and head back to the office, absolutely. The key success factors for that type of engagement are very different from when you come in with your partner or your mum or your dad or your cousin or a schoolmate you haven't seen for 20 years. And I think that provides just an extraordinary opportunity for Bluestone, and because organically, that's why this brand was created. It's not trying to be manufactured. I see all these other hospitality brands talking about, we want to be hospitality focused now. It's just bananas. It's,
lip service.
It is. It's a bit of hospitality washing, if you may. But for us, that's our purpose, and that's why it was created. And our challenge now is like, how do we have our whole team feel like it's a privilege to make someone feel really special? My amazing wife, Alexandra, and it's Valentine's Day today, so I have to drop that.
Valentine's Day,
Katie, who is the de facto co-founder of Bluestone. We bundle our 3 kids who are 5 and under. We put them in the stroll and walk down a local coffee shop. All we want is that recognition piece. You walk in, hi Alex, how are you? Good to see Arabella and Oliver, what have you. And
here's your usual.
Here's your usual. Great. Just that feeling of warmth and humanity. It's so addictive, but we're not doing it well enough consistently, and work from home and COVID and tech, all these things have challenges. And for us, we've got to be a bit of an antidote to that, I think.
Yeah. So it's interesting. You talked at the beginning about the success factor that caused Starbucks explosion.
Yep.
And the strategic advantage that sits at the core of the Starbucks world was one of convenience.
Yes.
And it sounds like yours is experience through and through, is creating that individual experience.
That's exactly right. Like, we have to lead with experience, but we need to be conscious that people still have expectations around fulfillment speed. That's how we differentiate. And our core customer is very differentiated versus what you'd find at Starbucks or Dunkin' or any of these other mass chain brands.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I feel like there's 2 places that takes me in terms of question. One is, how do you maintain that as you scale? It's so down to the individual treatment that your staff are giving. It's so down to that very special, unique feeling that you walk into when you go into your one in the West Village or your one in Williamsburg or whatever it is. How do you do that in a way that keeps the brand consistent as you expand?
That is the biggest challenge. And that is a challenge for all hospitality. But for us, being experience-led, the human connection piece and the service piece is the most important. Making a great coffee or making a great meal, there's not that much intellectual property in that. Really, there's not much intellectual property in hospitality. Really, your IP comes from the culture, which is your team and how they execute on the steps of service and the different processes and how they make people feel. That becomes your culture. That becomes your intellectual property. Most of the best restaurants you hear about because of the way it made someone feel, less about that dish. And I use that customer centricity in myself. I will go to a place because of how they make me feel and how we connect over that one dish was amazing, even though the service was completely impersonal and flat out awful. So for us, that is the biggest challenge. And the role we play is to try and educate our team about the privilege and the importance and the power of making someone feel really good. You never know. Like, we serve about 75,000 people a week, and you just never know the story of why someone's coming in and the background and the power you have to turn around a mum that's been up all night because the young child won't go to bed, or someone walks in and their family member's ill, or they've had a breakup, or they just lost their job. And
or they're lonely and it's Valentine's Day.
Exactly, today. And all you need is, like, how powerful is just that sincerity of eye contact, a smile, and to know your name. Like, everyone loves someone to know their name. And
instead of misspelling it 80 ways to Sunday.
Yeah, and you would know in Australia. And London coffee culture is pretty amazing. There's been a lot of investment there, and I used to work in London in 2011, and it was ahead of New York. Like, it really was. In this 4th, 5th wave we're talking about, where Starbucks was the 3rd wave, we're now on the 4th, 5th wave. I think that is the biggest challenge, but that is also the most amazing opportunity. And if we do it really well, then the barrier of entry for others is pretty high, and what we call to achieve this notion of boutique at scale. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Starbucks is famous for having coined the concept of the third space.
Yes.
And I'm trying to figure out what to coin as this space.
When Starbucks started, I think that they were very much focused on human connection, but through their commercial success, they realized that they're too big, too successful, and they then worked out that it was probably better to focus on convenience and speed. And now the huge investment in lower friction offerings, you see it in New York City, like how many Starbucks have closed and now they're just order ahead, a pickup window. Yeah. Starbucks started without any drive-throughs, and I think now 70% of all Starbucks stores have a drive-through.
That's fascinating. Yeah. So the other side of the question, tied to the experience that you've designed, is around the digital world. Your ethos is very analog. You've talked about this real world experience, the dangers of being too caught up in the digital world, but there is the inevitable necessity of needing the digital tools and platforms for a brand to expand and to exist in the similar way, even in the digital space. Can you talk a bit about how you extend that experience ethos into your digital presence?
The good thing is it's not mutually exclusive. It's not you're either analog with using humans or you're now using all tech and digital means. I think that it's just finding a sustainable and healthy blend and ultimately giving the consumer, our local, more power and more choice. So the great catalyst for us was COVID because we weren't able to serve people and have that regular notion of using the cash register or the POS system. We went from, say, 5% digital to 100% digital in the blink of an eye. And that was incredibly exhilarating. And the great news is all the technology we've been working on worked really successfully. And it was our own and it was organic, and tremendous shout out to the team, Liam's team and Andy's team and what they did. And, if you look at our core customer, 70% are millennial.
Yeah.
And millennials are, by and large, pretty digital centric. They're very confident in using their devices to pay for things. They have a lot of trust and confidence. So ultimately, we were able to build these payment channels and to make it seamless. So if you want to order with a server, great. If you want to order via your app, great. If you want to order via QR code, great. If you want to use a digital iPad in the store, you can use that, a mobile kiosk or something. There's all these different ways. The great news and the most powerful thing about our digital stack is the loyalty program, the insights that we gain there. So every time there's a transaction via the app, if you order ahead or order at the table or order for home delivery or order on the e-commerce store for, say, you want beans at home or you want capsules or what have you, all of that data gets aggregated into one repository, into one warehouse. And we then have much better insights into the frequency, what they're buying, what they're spending, what they like, what they don't like.
What the purchase journey is. That's
exactly.
Great.
How many Bluestone Lane stores they go to each week, every 14 days, every 21 days. Then you have all the opportunity to gamify, and you have such a powerful and a cost-efficient way to market to them. So instead of leveraging and paying on social media or paying on Google Ads or what have you, you now can market them really effectively via the loyalty. And we've just debuted something that was really fascinating this week as an example. So we're here, New York Fashion Week, it's taking place right now. So we have 3 levels of status. You have 4 levels. You have the baseline, then you have blue, green, and gold. And it's based on spend over the last 12 months. So blues, you have to spend at least 100, and then you've got different tiers, and gold's like $1,000 a year. We were able to reward all of our green and gold with New York Fashion Week party tickets because we are the coffee partner for New York Fashion Week. And instead of just giving them a discount or giving them free coffee, we said, hey, have an amazing experience that might align with your interests. And we're doing all the coffee. We're doing espresso martinis at night, and come to a fashion show with our partners, New York Fashion Week and Afterpay. And that was pretty incredible.
And probably getting a bunch of buzz on socials from that.
Yeah, and just to think more progressively about leveraging partnerships where we have similar core customer, they have similar psychographic profiles. So it's a really cool and innovative way. And for a company of our size, I don't think many brands are activating or even thinking this way. And
I was actually going to ask about that because it does feel, having looked at some of your history, that brand partnerships have actually been a really consistent part of your strategy over the years. Like you've got Khalifa Oat Milk when you launched the draft latte, and then Kate Hudson's wellness brand In Bloom in stores.
All smoothies.
It sounds like what you're looking for as criteria for partnership is an intersection of audience. Is there anything else from just a values perspective or an innovation level perspective?
Values, absolutely. Commitment to health, commitment to, I would just say commitment to humanity, like good companies run by good people that we trust and that are doing things the right way. It certainly must have the same core customer and needs to have a customer that's relevant to our market position and our geographic position. So partnering with a brand that is based in the Midwest is not really relevant for us because we're a coastal brand at this stage. So we've just had a really different approach to it as well, because being an outsider, the way I looked at it was thinking about how do I build a lifestyle brand that's an extension of Australian lifestyle. It's not just coffee. It's actually all about the way you make people feel. It's the atmosphere, it's the decor and look and feel. When we launched the business, there wasn't this whitewashed walls and blonde timber and plants that you see now.
Everything made of plywood.
Now you see everywhere. It's ubiquitous. That was Bluestone Lane. Before that, it was all dark reclaimed woods. It was very moody, very masculine. And that was not what you'd find in South Yarra in Melbourne or in Bondi or Bronte.
You want everything to be flooded by sunshine, exactly.
So we said, no, we're going to make these light. We've got to make these plate. Why aren't we leveraging the fact that it's an alfresco daytime offering?
Yeah.
And I think just that type of thing, and combined with my brother Andy, who came from an agency background. So he was in advertising, managing big accounts in Australia. He had Jeep Chrysler, he had Asahi, and he was always looking at different partnerships, whether it was sponsoring the Australian Open or sporting teams. He was overseeing above and below the line. And his approach has been just such a huge catalyst to some of these amazing partnerships. We've got a great partnership every year in Montauk. We have this place down there, we run a coffee shop, but we always do it with a partner.
Nice.
Whether it's Frankie's Bikinis last year and the year before it's been Cotton On, which is a fast fashion brand in Australia. We're always looking for different ways to collaborate because it's normally a win-win because coffee is so accessible, far more accessible than alcohol. Alcohol, everyone needs to be over 21. Coffee, it's anyone can come in. We take our kids every day. Do they drink coffee? No, that would be an absolute disaster. But God. They have the baby Chino, or they'll have a bite of avocado toast. It's all good. It's very family friendly. And, we have this differentiated customer and we've got the data to back it up, where a lot of people might say, oh, yeah, our average core customer is 20 to 28 and they're 50-50. We have all the data.
You've got all the cohorts.
And everything. Yeah. And we say, they go here and this is when they come and this is what they buy. They come after going to yoga and they only come on Sundays, or they come now on Mondays, Fridays and Sundays because they work from home. And that data is really powerful. Yeah.
I love it. I think it feels so single-mindedly tied back to experience, right? Like even the partnerships, every one of them, they're actually quite focused on some of these different cohorts. They've all got the lifestyle angle. They all have a multi-channel angle to them. It's super fun. And you can turn them around quickly. So there's a whole diversity in things you can talk about as a brand as well at the same time.
Well, that's one thing that we are so good at, that agility and focus on execution. So Reid Hoffman's got a great saying that no one owns a good idea. Everything's about execution. And I repeat that ad nauseum with my team because literally everything's about execution, the shoulda, woulda, coulda. Everyone's got a story about that. But
you'll hear Gary use that, something along those lines pretty much.
I'd imagine, but it's when the rubber hits the road. And for us, if we have an opportunity, we can activate immediately. Yeah. And the activation probably come from me. I'll be like, okay, we can do it. And
this is what it looks like.
Yeah, we just gonna get in there, and I love that scrappiness. And every time we've moved slightly away from it, the business performance has dragged.
And it gets corporate.
Yeah, we're just cooler, light on the feet, lean, where the rubber band is at full tension. You don't want it to snap, but you definitely need it, basically, need on the edge.
Fully caffeined up approach.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I've got two last questions. One is, what's your hot take on what the shape of hospitality in the coffee space is going to look like as we go back into this kind of hybrid setup? Is it going to eventually rubber band back to where we were, or do you see a new fourth way?
Really with mixed emotions, because we have a very precarious footprint based on the ways of working nowadays. Right. And I'm a huge believer in flex and hybrid working. I came from a more traditional mindset, being in professional sports and then investment banking. If you weren't at your desk, you weren't producing value. There was a whole FaceTime culture there, and it was just be there and grind it out. Even if you didn't have anything on, you got to be there and you got to be ready. It's just not needed now with technology. And ultimately, like, we need more women in the workforce to drive productivity, to drive efficiency and accessibility. And I just see that working from home enables that. My wife, who's super intelligent, super driven, hardworking, got the right values, really creative. Like, we've got 3 young kids. Like, for her, going to work and going to the office, the barrier, the friction's too great.
Right.
But if she could work every day from home, even part-time, 3-4 hours in between school drop-off or what have you, that's amazing, because that's someone that you want in the workforce. Yeah. So I'm a big supporter of it. But the challenge for Bluestone is we have so many of our stores in the bottom of office buildings. Yeah. And ultimately, the biggest challenge in our business, hands down, through this whole COVID thing, like, we got through COVID, there was government support. I think people rallied together. We made some really dramatic decisions. Landlords were supportive, suppliers were supportive. Right now, this is without a doubt the biggest challenge I've got.
This is the tough bit.
That I have a lot of stores which were meant to be back now, but they are busy only 3 days a week. We have how many in Hudson Yards? 4 in Hudson Yards, and 3 of them are only busy really 3 days a week. So how do you run a business when you have no Monday anymore? You certainly have no Friday. New York, Summer Fridays in New York was a real thing. Now this Summer Friday, it's just like Friday's no long. It's a 4-day work week, honestly. Right. In most of the cities we're in now, people do not go in to work on Friday. Now, if you're a small business in the bottom of an office lobby or around the corner, it's going to be incredibly hard. Your whole cost structure is upside down. Mm-hmm. Now, you can't pay people less. Participation rate is still too low. So you don't have any flex there. You've got a lot of landlords that sign leases and they might have provided...
They're all getting itchy feet too. Yeah.
Abatement and support. And now they're like, okay, we got to be back to paying full rent. But the problem is, I used to have 5 days of business. Let's say wipe the weekend. Now I've only got 3. There's a huge reckoning that's happening right now. It's going to be pretty awful. I think all cities and governments are really focused on, like, how they play a role here, but you're going to see the hollowing out of a lot of these sort of business districts, because it's not sustainable if people are only working 2 to 3 days. And I'm a supporter of hybrid, but I just see the challenges.
I'm seeing it myself. We are all back hybrid now in the Sasha Vayner world. And I feel like the center of gravity of so many of those business services is shifting. The hollowing out of the center of the commercial space, but then what's springing up, like in my area of East Williamsburg, is a really active community of people who are getting out of their house because they've been on Zoom calls for 6 hours straight and need to go grab coffee or whatever. Yeah. So I guess there could be a refocusing of where the spaces are.
There's a pivot to residential areas without a doubt now, and we've found the tailwinds there. If we generate 65% of sales at our residential stores, whether it's urban resi or suburban resi, we had very limited suburban exposure prior to COVID. We only had 1 suburban store. But what's happening is, they would get 65% of sales on the weekend, but now it's more balanced because people are coming Monday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday. And so it's recalibrating your real estate strategy and trying to do it in a way that manages the cost of exit, the operating leverage.
Right.
And not everyone has capital. They've got through COVID, which might have been just survival. And now you're saying close at the bottom of an office building or close around the corner from an office tower and then move to open in Greenpoint or Borum Hill or Hoboken or Williamsburg. Not everyone has.
Yeah, it's not as easy as clicking your fingers.
$500,000, $1 million, and that's sad because who really pays the price for that? It's the small, independent, creative, artisanal operators. The chains, they're fine. Put a new Sweetgreen or Chick-fil-A or something. They got money. They can do it. What I care about is the small guys. They make up the commerce in society. It's still run by small business. Right. It's not run by the big
the beating heart of the economy, without a doubt.
It's something that we've all got to consider. And even as a consumer, like, think about it. Just be kind. Like, a lot of these businesses,
where are you putting your money?
Have really been through the ringer, and they survived COVID after being told by the government that you're not allowed to operate and you cannot serve people like that. They have to stay home. And then now they're allowed out. and there's no one to sell to. Like I think it's just being really conscious that this challenge is real.
And ongoing.
Yeah.
It didn't just suddenly end with the quote unquote end, not really, of the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly.
On the more positive side, final question.
Yeah.
What are you most excited about this year? I mean, you've got so many irons in fires. You've got the retail experience, you've got the e-com side, you've got a bunch of products, you've got all sorts of partnerships. What's the most exciting thing that you're looking at this year?
I think there's a couple of things. We're pushing more aggressively into Texas, and that was a big leap for us. So that's a new market. We open another location there on tomorrow in Rice Village in Houston. So there you go. I think that's really interesting for us because an Australian premium hospitality coffee lifestyle brand in
the heart of Texas. I love it.
I think that's a really big challenge for us, but I think it's a great opportunity. So I'm excited about that because if that market entry continues to grow, then I think the scalability of the brand's really exciting. Ultimately, we've brought in a lot of new team members to help us scale up our platform and just build a more robust infrastructure so that we can go fast. And I think this year, we really need to focus on that. The abundance of capital and the appetite to grow has changed a lot in the last 6 months. So really now it's like really just sticking to your knitting, making sure that whatever you do it well and sustainably and profitably. So for us, we are opening, got 6 to 10 opens this year, but we just got to make sure everything's right because the acceleration will come back. Obviously, the movement, the velocity interest rate increases. Everyone's a little bit on the sidelines. So I think just getting that platform right to accelerate again. We've had a great open, our first ever airport location. So we opened in Terminal A, the new Terminal A in Newark. That was pretty cool. Getting a coffee.
Congrats.
I'm flying home on Friday. I live in California. Out of Terminal A, so I get my Bluestone before I get on the plane. That's a big perk. That's
major
a big thrill.
Planning. That's a reason to go to Newark when typically you go to JFK.
That terminal's pretty good, actually. I must admit, there's a plug there. There's lots, and personally, I'm always learning and evolving, and you can't take life for granted. And I get a lot of energy just with being with our locals, being with the team. And I think this year's going to be really great. And why shouldn't it be? You know, you just got to keep moving forward, keep evolving. It's never as good or it's never as bad as you think. And just be open to opportunities. And it's amazing what happens.
I love it. And stay true to an ethos, which, you've got such clear eyes about, which is fantastic. But it's been such a pleasure speaking with you, Nick.
Thank you
so much for joining us.
Oh,
great
pleasure.
Chat.
It's great.
Thanks for joining us for Building While Flying today. I hope you learned as much as we did. We'll meet you right back here next time for another flight.